by M. Not Shyamalan. And that joke is so stupid. I apologize for making it.
Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. You can find us at thenerdspodcast.com, and you can follow us on our Instagram and Twitter through our handle at thenerdspodcast. If you'd like to reach us directly, including sending us suggestions for our nerd favorite segment, you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. Additionally, we have a YouTube page under the Nerds You're Looking For banner, and each of us also has a Letterboxd account, which is basically social media for watching movies. I'm at that Tyler Hunt, and my co-host Pat can be found at the Nerds Podcast. With all of that said, and without further ado, alongside me as always is my co-host Pat Attack. What's up, man?
I'm good, man. I kind of feel weird, so I had every intention of complaining about my week. I had a really bad week. I hurt myself at the gym and my back was hurting all week. But kind of behind the curtains a little bit, we were just discussing before we started recording, and it sounds like you had a worse week. So now I feel like a little bitch complaining about my back hurting.
Yeah, so I didn't mention it on last week's episode, and to be honest, coming into this week's episode, I initially didn't plan on bringing it up, but it was such a big part of everything that I've done since the last time we spoke. I feel like I almost have to at this point. So yeah, I had eye surgery last Tuesday to fix a detached retina, and I tried to stay pretty much as ignorant as I could about the whole procedure because I didn't want to start freaking out beforehand, but it's not fun. I was telling you before we started recording that I felt bamboozled because the doctors really downplayed it, and they were like, okay, yeah, the surgery takes about 45 minutes to an hour. It's not that bad. You'll have to wear an eye patch for about a day, and then your vision will probably get a little worse, but after that, you'll be good to go. So luckily, I took off a few extra days from work because I would have been fucking useless. Just the pain and adjusting to not being able to use one of your eyes is crazy. So, I mean, I'm still not confident in my ability to drive, but I'm back to work tomorrow and I'll figure it out. But yeah, it's not been a fun week at all.
Yeah, so it doesn't sound like either one of us had a good week. Like I said, I hurt my back. I've been trying to go to the gym, wake up early before work and go to the gym since I've been getting into streaming again after work. So it's like I didn't want to get out of my gym routine. And then Monday I have back problems from wrestling and playing football in high school. So yeah, I heard it again. I kind of tweaked it, and I feel, again, weird for complaining about it on here since you basically couldn't see for a couple of days. But it's like you don't realize how old you are until it hurts to wipe your own ass. I was like, man, I thought I was only 31. That's not that old, but I felt like I was 80 this whole week because it's literally Friday was the first day that I even felt good again.
Yeah, man, that's exactly how I felt this week too. I'm not 30 yet. I'll be 30 in April, but I'm definitely feeling like I'm turning that corner. I've always had really good health, and I've not really had to go to the doctor much or I'm not on any medication. And then this whole thing has been like a swift kick in the ass. So I've got to get my shit together. So I feel ya.
I have to admit, though, I am a bit disappointed because last week you had mentioned that you were getting this taken care of, off recording, and you mentioned that you may have to wear an eye patch. And I was looking forward to our Skype call with you with an eye patch.
Oh, I have 3 eye patches to choose from. They set me up, but Yeah, I promise you, it is more sad than funny. It is not.
Oh, I think I need to find out.
No, I have to wear it at night so I don't accidentally like rub my eye or something, but I've weaned off of wearing the eye patch during the day, but I do not look like Snake Plissken or Nick Fury. I look like a crazy person with a metal eye patch medically taped to his face. So, and it makes it hard to wear my glasses, and it's just a giant pain in the ass. So, there was a shred of possibility that I thought that it might be kind of cool to have an eye patch. It is not. It is very humbling.
What I'm confused about is they gave you 3. Like, you don't have 3 eyeballs. Like, why 3 eye patches? I don't understand. Like,
I don't know.
You have like a going out, like a fancy eye patch? Like, I don't understand why you needed 3.
I wish that was the case. I don't know. There was the one that they taped to my face after the surgery was done that I just kind of came home with, and then there was like a clear one that they sent with me, and one that is metal and has like little holes in it. So I don't know. I got to keep all 3, but that's what's funny is I would probably send you the picture if I was sure that you wouldn't post it on our Facebook or something. But after my
100% would. 100%.
I went to the doctor the day after my surgery, and he's like, "Why did they use a whole roll of tape on your face?" Like, I looked like Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight after he is in the hospital and he's like going through the burn treatments, because half of my face was completely bandaged, and they drew an arrow on my forehead. And they told me that arrow has to be pointing up. So I had to keep my head tilted because of a gas bubble they put in my eye. The problem is, despite all of the shit that they taped on my face, they drew the arrow in a permanent marker on the little bit of my forehead that was exposed. And so
that is fantastic.
That was the other thing, was the doctor was like, "Why did they draw this on your face?" And he gave my wife like 3 alcohol wipes to take it off. And it's pretty much gone at this point. But I would never speak poorly of the nurses. Like, they're great, but they definitely made some strange decisions in wrapping me up to send me home. Like, between using so much tape on my face and drawing on my face like I was a drunk kid at a frat party, it was just nonsense.
Are you sure that wasn't a penis? It wasn't actually an arrow. They just drew a penis on your forehead and told you it was an arrow.
Yeah, they were just fucking with me, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So if this is your first episode, we start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it What We're Into. So what are you into this week?
So obviously, coming out of this surgery, I had a lot of downtime this week, and I ended up binging a show that I wanted to talk about. Realistically, I really wanted to play a lot of games this week while I was off, but I couldn't do it with the way that I felt. So unfortunately, I, instead of playing Red Dead Redemption or something, binged Future Man, which I don't know if you've heard of. It's a show on Hulu. It's 30-minute episodes. It stars Josh Hutcherson, Eliza Coupe, Derek Wilson, and then in the second season especially, Haley Joel Osment. So it's a show that's produced by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who, of course, are very well known at this point, and they also co-directed the first 3 episodes of the series. So basically, the show revolves around Josh Hutcherson, his character named Josh Futterman. He's a janitor. He works at a clinic that is developing a cure for STDs. He's basically a loser for the most part. He still lives with his parents. He spends all of his time playing video games, the generic, movie loser stuff that you would consider to be a loser, I guess. But there's this game that Josh is obsessed with called the Biotic Wars that no one has ever beaten. And when he finally does beat the game and is the first person to do so, he's visited by Wolf and Tiger, which are special resistance soldiers from the future that sent this game back in time to find the Future Man, who is the person that is supposedly going to save humanity. So I've never seen The Last Starfighter, but apparently this is very close to that movie, so they make a lot of jokes about it. Obviously, as I've just described who Josh is, it's probably not surprising that he doesn't turn out to be the Future Man that they expected, but season 1 basically follows the 3 as they time jump trying to fix things, and season 2 basically follows the 3 characters in an altered future that they've created. So, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg aren't known for their highbrow humor by any means, but this show is pretty lowbrow even for them. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing or that I'm above it, because I'm definitely not, as our listeners know, but I feel like it should be said. The show is super meta, which I really like. There are a ton of pop culture references, especially to movies that involve time travel, so that's a plus for a nerd like me. There's even an entire episode in season 1 that's dedicated to James Cameron's craziness, which is really funny. The problem is that this is definitely a tale of two seasons. So season 1 is a lot like Back to the Future in the sense that there's time hopping, they're trying to fix realities with time travel, and then there's a family dynamic that's pretty good and pretty funny. Season 2 is pretty much just Mad Max. There's very little time travel, and the characters are set in a really dumb setting for 12 out of the 13 episodes. Basically, season 1 is a lot of fun, and season 2 gets tired really quickly. The performances on the show are about what you'd expect from a TV show, and while there are definitely some solid comedic chops on the show, sometimes deliveries do fall flat. You know, I don't think Josh Hutcherson is a crazy great actor. He's okay on the show, and Eliza Coupe and Derek Wilson are also average at best, so they don't bring a ton to the show in my opinion, but it is what it is. Each episode also typically has some kind of action sequence, and they're typically hit or miss as well. It's not like this show is delivering the hallway scenes from Daredevil here. It's pretty straightforward, and it does what it has to do. So I honestly wish I had more to say here, since I just binged 26 episodes of the show this week, but all in all, it's pretty forgettable if I'm being honest, and it quickly lost its charm after the first season. So if season 3 gets picked up and it comes out next year, I'll probably give the first couple episodes a go to see if they course correct some of the missteps of season 2. But overall, I'm not a fan that the direction that the show went in this year.
So this episode is episode 224, and we have done this particular segment since episode 1. So we've talked a lot about a lot of different stuff. So I want to give you shit for not remembering that I brought up this show when it came out on season 1.
Really?
We've talked about a lot of stuff. Yeah. You started off what you're into by like, oh, I don't know if you've seen the show. Yeah, I have seen the show, and I talked about it on an episode. But like I said, we've done over 200 of these, so I don't expect you to remember everything about this. But it is surprising because you didn't remember that I had seen this show before, but you said a lot of the same stuff that I said. Now, I've only seen the first season. That was when I talked about it. So I haven't checked out season 2 yet. This is one of the things that I have put on my long list of stuff to watch is season 2 of the show. But I was really excited for the show just because I like some of the people that are involved, Seth Rogen and so on. And the first couple episodes are really funny and are exactly what you said. They're definitely lowbrow comedy, but there's some really fun episodes, especially when they start going back into the past. That stuff gets kind of funny, but then it kind of wears on you by the end of season 1. And so this was a show that, yes, I will eventually watch season 2, but it's not like super high on my watch list.
Yeah, I feel like an idiot for not remembering that you talked about this show before. And what's sad is it has happened before. I remember talking about what we do on in the shadows, and you being like, "Yeah, I talked about this like 3 months ago." So I don't know. Maybe I need to work on my active listening skills.
I honestly can't really give you too much shit because I think I've talked about something twice on the show for what I was into. So this is not really your bad. I mean, I don't even remember some of the stuff that I talk about, so I can't really give you too much shit.
All right, man. So what are you into this week?
So I'm into Second Act. No, I'm kidding. I don't want to talk about that movie anymore. So if you're not aware, I did do a Facebook Live review of the J-Lo, Jenny from the Block movie, Second Act, that Tyler made me go see. So check that out. I'll be doing a Facebook Live review of movies every Friday. So check those out as well. Only one of them are going to be a shitty movie that Tyler makes me go see. So, no, what I'm actually into is a suggestion from one of our Facebook listeners, subscribers, likers. I don't know what followers, I guess. I don't know what you call Facebook people, but yeah, Rob Walter, who is actually a host of a podcast here in Evansville that I've been on, the Bulldog Unchained podcast, which is really cool. It's just a bunch of guys and they just kind of bullshit for like 2 hours. So it's definitely not as structured as our podcast is, but it's really fun. I've actually been asked to be on it more than once. They record basically the same time we record, so it just hasn't been able to work out. But it's a really cool podcast. It's the Bulldog Unchained, if you want to check them out. But he suggested I see this Netflix show called You. I mean, I got a ton of suggestions, and I appreciate everybody, and I have made a very, very long list of all those suggestions, but this was the first one that I wanted to check out, and it is apparently based on a book of the same name. Season 1 was originally on Lifetime, which will be important later in my review. So it got moved. I don't know if it got canceled on Lifetime like after season 1 or if it was part of the deal, because I think it was on Lifetime, but it was also on Netflix at the same time. So it's apparently now a Netflix original starting from season 2 on. And essentially what this show's about, it follows really one person, but kind of two people. The person that you follow the most in this show is a bookstore manager, and it's kind of like a hipster indie bookstore in New York City, and his name is Joe. And he meets at the store this female customer named Guinevere Beck. And one of my small nitpicks of the show is they don't give her enough shit that her name is Guinevere. I'm sure, like I said, this show is based on a book, so I'm sure that that's her name in the book, and they were trying to be like faithful to the source material, but that's a real stupid fucking name. I'm really glad that they don't call her Guinevere very often. They just call her Beck. Like, that's what everybody calls her in this show. So I'm glad, because I don't know if I could have made it through like 2 episodes of this show if they kept calling her Guinevere, because that's a real stupid fucking name. But I didn't know anything about this show going in. Like, I just saw the suggestion. I knew it was on Netflix. I was like, oh, well, it's only 10 episodes. We can bust that out really quickly. But my wife was super surprised that I wanted to watch this, because apparently she knew what it was about. And essentially what happens is Joe meets Beck, and he immediately not just falls in love with her, but becomes obsessed with her. Like, he's a fucking crazy person. And he immediately starts stalking her online and IRL. So it kind of takes off from there. Like, the first episode is basically them meeting and then him becoming a crazy person. So I wasn't too into that immediately, because I was like, oh, it's a Lifetime show. It's going to get really melodramatic, all that good stuff. And the reason that this show hooked me, because it did hook me, is the fact that Joe as a character, a lot of, especially in the first like episode or two, a lot of his character is kind of, he's a very internal character. Like, he rationalizes a lot of what he does internally, and you kind of just hear him talking to himself essentially, and he rationalizes a lot of what he does, all the creepy shit that he does in his head. And it kind of reminded me of like season 1 and 2 of Dexter, just how that character acts. Now, this show isn't as good as that show was in its first couple of seasons, but just as a character, I think Joe has a lot of the same interesting traits Dexter did in the first couple of seasons of that show. And so that's kind of what hooked me. You know that he's a terrible person and that he's a fucking creep, but at the same time, he rationalizes it in a way that I don't think you necessarily empathize with him, because you know that he's a crazy person, but it doesn't make it unbearable to watch him do the things that he does. And it definitely has a psychological thriller aspect to it. It's kind of like Single White Female, that type of thing. Like, you understand that he's crazy, but it's also kind of fun to watch at the same time. Well, the first couple episodes are really good, but there are 10 episodes in this season, and again, I've mentioned this before, but this was originally on Lifetime, and Lifetime basically has a reputation of having some really like soap opera type of movies and TV on there, very melodramatic stuff on that network. And a lot of the middle episodes of this season are that. They're very melodramatic. They're very, I don't want to say teen drama because the characters aren't teenagers, but very like a soap opera. So I definitely found myself kind of fading in and out as far as my interest level in this show in the middle of the season, but it started off really strong. It ended really strong. It had decent, surprisingly decent character development in this show, and I think that it ends on a note that the second season could be very, very interesting. So I wouldn't expect a ton going into this show. Like I said, there's definitely some melodrama in the middle of the season that isn't the best, but if you're like me that watch a lot of stuff on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, I definitely would add this to your list because it's not a bad watch.
So, is this season just the season that aired on Lifetime?
Yeah, but I think that it was also on Netflix as well. Like it's like billed as a Netflix original.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I mean, sounds interesting. So I'll keep it in mind, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would definitely put it on your watch list. I just wouldn't like rush out to watch it for sure.
Perfect, man. You ready to talk about comics?
Yeah. What'd you read this week?
So I'm a little nervous that we may have read the same thing, but you didn't text me, so that makes me think that you read something off the wall. But there were only a couple of number one issues to choose from this week, and I obviously couldn't make it to the comic shop because of my eye surgery, so I went with Black Widow number one.
No, I didn't read it.
All right, perfect. So this is written by Jen and Sylvia Saska, the Saska sisters, and it was drawn by an artist named Flaviano. So there's that.
A lot of stupid names.
Yeah, a lot of weird stuff to start this off with. But this shouldn't take very long on my end because this is one of those comics where I feel so indifferently that there honestly isn't much to say. The story is basically that Natasha was killed and then resurrected during Secret Empire, that storyline from a couple years ago that I never personally finished. And this basically follows her now that she's separated herself from S.H.I.E.L.D. and other formal agencies. Basically, it's a Black Widow that isn't under any type of control. However, the opening of this book basically sees her teaming up with Captain America. So that story is kind of, I guess, a prelude to what I'm assuming is going to be the launch pad for the new story, which revolves around her getting involved with some seedy underground human trafficking situation that's very reminiscent of the movie Hostel that she is most likely going to bust. So writing wise, I was hoping to see a lot more out of this issue. When you have dual writers named the Saska sisters, you expect things to be epic, or at least I did. But this was very run-of-the-mill. I feel like I've talked about bias a lot on the podcast lately, and I definitely had a bias here, which is that two sisters writing a Black Widow comic is going to be awesome because it's a badass female character being written by not one, but two females. However, they fell into traps that I think other writers do with characters like this. And an example would be a line of dialogue that I pulled out specifically, which was her during a fight saying, "Let's play, but I get to be on top," which I think is kind of demeaning to the character in a way. I mean, that's definitely not what I was looking for from this Black Widow comic. There's an afterword by these sisters where they talk about how much this character means to them and how they grew up reading Black Widow and were excited to deliver a story where the character isn't constrained at all or held back, but none of that showed up in issue 1. The writing doesn't come close to the writing that was done for Black Widow a couple years ago, which was really fun and I really enjoyed. Art-wise, it was kind of the same thing, kind of a disappointment. The art wasn't bad by any means, but when, again, you go by one name, and that name is Flaviano, you expect something outrageous and creative and distinct, but everything was pretty run-of-the-mill. So I know that this has been a pretty negative review. I think, honestly, I'm more disappointed in the comic than just thinking that it was really, really bad. But I wasn't what I wanted, so it's not something that I'm going to keep up with.
Yeah, so you mentioned there wasn't a ton that came out this week, and this was a book that I looked at momentarily and was like, well, maybe that's something that I could read because we've been doing a lot of number ones. But every once in a while, I do like to do an update on something that I talked about before. And because there wasn't a ton that interests me that came out this week, I decided that this was a perfect episode to do that. So that's why I didn't text you, because I know that you don't read TMNT Urban Legends, and that's what I was going to talk about. So yeah, I probably won't read Black Widow, but
yeah, don't.
Yeah, I'm glad that I didn't read it, and I'm glad that I read what I did read, which is TMT or Urban Legends. So if you're not aware, if you missed the episode, or I think I've actually talked about this a couple of times. This book is written by a guy named Gary Carlson, and then the art is done by Frank Fosco. And like I said, I've talked about this a couple of times. I wanted to update all of our listeners because since I've talked about this, there's been, I think, like 5 or 6 issues since the last time I brought this up. And for those that aren't aware, this is basically, they did a volume 3 of the TMNT comic book that's not part of the canon a few years ago. I mean, I'm sure it's been more than that, but it never got a ending to it because I don't know if it didn't sell as much as they thought it would, and so it just they never finished it. And so they just recently, within the past year, decided to re-release this volume 3 and give it an actual ending. So they gave it a different title, which of course is Urban Legends. And I'm not going to go through all of like the 4 or 5 issues one by one because, I mean, obviously, if you're not reading this, that stuff's not going to really interest you that much. I will just say that for most people, I think that know of TMNT, they know them because of the 80s cartoon or the most recent cartoons, and then the movies. And I know that probably most of our listeners obviously know this by now, but I don't know if the general public knows that this is obviously based on a comic book. Because I was a huge TMNT fan when I was a little kid, and I didn't know until I was in like junior high that it was based on a comic book. So I don't know if that's common knowledge amongst the general public. And because of that, I don't know if a lot of people know that this comic is a lot darker than those cartoons and those movies, even though I think the first TMNT live action movie did kind of hit on some of that darkness a little bit better than you would have expected. But for most people, I don't think that they know that that's a thing in the comic books. Like, it's basically the equivalent of us having like a not so subtle reference to Star Wars in the title of our podcast. TMNT is a not so subtle nod to Daredevil. They essentially wanted to make Daredevil, but with turtles, like the same ooze that gave Daredevil his powers, gave the Turtles their powers, essentially. And so it's super dark, but even the main run is dark and gritty, but it has some of those cartoon aspects that you would expect from a character or characters like this. Like, it's kind of a silly concept. It's a really silly concept. And so there are some cheesy and campy moments in the main book that I really like. But this book takes that dark and grittiness to a whole new level. It's almost like somebody watched the cartoon and was like, no, this isn't the Turtles that I know. The Turtles that I know are dark. And it's like they wanted to overcorrect because they went like on the opposite side of the spectrum. It's so a couple of things that jumped out at me. And of course, I'm not going to spoil anything, but like, some of the darker aspects of this book is like what they do to Donnie, who is of course my favorite of the Turtles. I have him tattooed on my leg. I've always been a Donatello fan. What they do to him is pretty awful. I'm not going to go into particulars because again, I don't want to spoil anything, but that's one of the things that jumps out at you, especially in the first like issue or two. Some of the stuff that he has to go through is pretty horrible. And then Casey Jones, like apparently in this storyline, he had a wife that died in childbirth, and now he's back with April, and they're like raising this girl. But Casey Jones is like super like goth about the whole thing, as you might imagine. Like he's always super depressed about what happened to his ex-wife. And then Raphael has essentially half of his face burnt off, and he wears an eye patch like Tyler. So it's like that's just some of the stuff that happens in this book. Like they have none of the TMNT cartoon stuff that I'm used to, which is disappointing because, like I said, that's what I grew up on. I like the dark and gritty aspect of the main book, but I kind of just wish that Urban Legends had a little bit more of the cartoon feel to it, because that's just the Turtles that I'm used to. I like this book for what it is. Like, none of the writing, none of the artwork is bad by any means. It's just, I don't know, it feels like I'm reading different characters than the characters that I'm used to, which is a little disappointing. I'm still going to finish it because, like I said, if you go into this book knowing what it is, I think that it can still be entertaining, and it's definitely a very well-written book, but it's just not exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's similar to the conversation that we've had before about like DC especially, or even the Marvel TV shows, is you don't have to make it darker than you need to. And, you know, the Turtles, I 100% agree. They definitely come from a dark place. So I think that presence should be there, but it has to be balanced. And I think that first live action movie from the early 90s does the best job of that. Like there's definitely
for sure
comedy, there's definitely slapstick, but then you also have, I believe it's it's Leonardo that's like half dead in the tub at one point, right? So
no, it's Raphael.
Is it Raph?
Because he goes off on his own and then he gets attacked by Foot Clan. I've seen that movie too many times. Immediately, I'm like telling you the entire plot of the movie.
No, I need to watch it again. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but I love that movie, and it's actually a good segue into nerd news, because. So I'll just get into nerd news if you're good with it. But
for sure.
They're going to relaunch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie franchise. So kind of also tying it back to what you had to say about that comic is I hope that they do a better job of staying grounded as opposed to what they did with the most recent two movies. I mean, those movies were fun for what they were, but at the end of the day, I think that you want your Turtles to be street level, and you want there to be an edge of darkness, but you still want the comedy and the pizza and the banter that we know from the cartoons.
Yeah, 100%. And I posted this on our Facebook page, so some of you will already know what I'm about to say, but they're never going to make the movie that I want them to make, because I think Out of the Shadows is the movie that is going to make them the most money. Like that type of like kiddie, cartoony kind of ridiculousness. And again, I mean, the characters are ridiculous, but they are grounded, like you said, and they are darker than most people know them. And I just don't think that they're ever going to do the Batman Begins of TMNT, because I don't know if that's going to make them the most money, because they've taken a dark and gritty concept that was the original comic book, and it's kind of turned it into a different thing. Again, I loved that thing. Like that's my intro into nerd culture was TMNT growing up. Like I love that cartoon, but once I got into the comics, I was like, oh, well, it could be this other thing too. And they're never going to make that other thing, because that's not the demographic that's going to make this movie or this franchise profitable. So it's a little bit disappointing. I don't want them to reboot it. I would just like them to continue because I liked the two movies. I thought that they had the same heart of the 80s cartoon. If that's the way that you're going to go, then why don't you just continue with that? I mean, the creature design was stupid, and some of the CGI, especially with Splinter, was pretty bad. But if you're going to go that tone and that route, why just keep redoing it? Like, unless you're going to do something different, which, again, I don't think they will, why even bother? Like, that's the thing that bothers me the most about this, is they just keep rebooting it, and I care less and less every time, which sucks because I'm a huge TMNT fan.
Yeah, I mean, I just think at a certain level they don't know what to do. I mean, I think that the problem with those two movies that most recently came out is you have Michael Bay as a producer, and they treat them like Transformers movies as opposed to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. Like, you have them jumping out of planes and driving tanks and doing all of this crazy, batshit crazy, stuff, instead of them just taking down the Foot Clan in New York. So, I don't know. For me, it's just they gotten too far away from the characters, and I think that studios are starting to learn that bigger isn't always better, as evidenced by a movie like Bumblebee, where they kind of took a step back from what the Transformers movies had become. So hopefully they can do that similarly with the Turtles.
For sure.
Cool, man. So next story involves Mission Impossible. So I'm sure you saw it, but they are moving forward with not one, but two Mission Impossible movies that are going to film back to back with Christopher. I'm going to butcher his last name. I think it's Query, the guy who did Mission Impossible Fallout, coming back for both of those movies. So I think that this, unfortunately, is probably one of those things where they got another taste of success and now they're getting a little too greedy. Like, I can't imagine that they're going to hit this out of the park. Like, Mission Impossible Fallout was, I think, a surprise, and obviously we both gave it positive reviews, and it was on my, honorable mention list for top 10 of 2018, but I think that they just saw what this franchise can still do, and now they're like, oh, we're going to make two movies, and it's not going to work out, in my opinion.
The thing that I was most curious about when I saw that they were filming it back to back is, typically in my film nerd brain that I can't shut off, it usually means that they're going to be connected. Now, of course, Ethan Hunt, he's the connective tissue throughout all of these movies, but they're not necessarily super connected, if that makes any sense. There's characters that come and go as this franchise evolves, but other than the Syndicate, not a lot of these movies were connected as far as the villain was concerned. So a film that films back to back would, at least to me, indicate that maybe the first film is kind of the Avengers Infinity War of Mission Impossible, where it kind of ends but doesn't really have an ending, and that the second movie is going to be the finale of whatever story that they're going to tell. But, that could be completely false. It could just be they wanted to do them back to back. That's just how the filming schedule worked out best for them. But my film nerd brain would indicate that, usually when they do something like that, it usually means that they're connected more than just recurring characters.
No, I agree. And I think that works a lot for movies like the Avengers, but this is Mission Impossible, so I do think they're biting off more than they can chew. So we'll see how those movies turn out, but I am a little pessimistic here.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you're the one that was a lot more positive about Fallout than I was, so you're definitely going to be a little bit more excited going into these movies than I will be, for sure.
Okay, cool. So next up is Ghostbusters. So I'm actually surprised that you didn't post anything to the Facebook page about this one, but Jason Reitman, who's a great director in his own right, but is also the son of Ivan Reitman, who directed the first two Ghostbusters movies, is coming on board for a Ghostbusters film set in the same universe as Ghostbusters 1 and 2 from the 80s. So it's going to completely avoid the 2016 reboot that they did with Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy, and it will instead be set in the same universe as the original films. So that is coming out in 2020. Apparently it's been in development for a while, and he put out a statement kind of explaining why he wanted to go about doing this. And he also released, or the studio released, a trailer where they find the car in a barn. So Yeah, it sounds like the original cast will be involved in some capacity with newer Ghostbusters also coming on board, but there's not a lot of details except that it'll come out next summer.
Yeah, so I've talked about this before with the reboot that they did a while back, and that I wasn't as upset as some people were, mostly because I think some people were just being sexist about the whole thing, but that's a whole different conversation. I love Ghostbusters. Like, it's one of the funniest movies that has ever been made, in my opinion. And I'm obviously not the only one that shares that opinion. But Ghostbusters 2 is not that good of a movie. It's not a terrible movie. And I think that if it was the first Ghostbusters movie, then maybe it wouldn't have gotten shit on as much, because it's not a terrible movie. It feels like a cookie cutter sequel to the first one. And they tried to do the same jokes, and it just didn't work in the second one, which again is a conversation we've had before with comedy sequels and just how they don't work usually. And this is a great example of it. And that was one thing that really bugged me about people's reaction to the reboot, is they're like, oh, they're ruining my childhood. No, if you're being really honest, Ghostbusters 2 ruined the first Ghostbusters movie more than that reboot ruined the first Ghostbusters movie. Like, they made two movies, and one of them was great, and the other one was mediocre. And so that's kind of where I'm at with the Ghostbusters franchise. Like, yes, I'm excited that most of the original people that had a hand in the first Ghostbusters movie are going to be back, and that's exciting, but I just don't see a world where they're going to pull this off.
Yeah, I'm definitely a bit pessimistic about this one too. I do think that Jason Reitman being involved is huge. He's an amazing storyteller. He's done some really great films, so I'm excited to see what he brings to this franchise that he kind of grew up with in a way. I don't know. I don't want to get into the sexist conversation either, because that's a disgusting conversation, and the way people that reacted in 2016 when that movie came out was piss poor. I don't think though that them avoiding the reboot is anything against that movie necessarily. I think that studios are finally starting to realize that we are all creatures of nostalgia. We all want continuity. We all want to revisit things from our childhood. And that's what they should have done with the 2016 movie. Like, I would have been fine with, those four characters if they were just picking up the mantle of the original Ghostbusters. But instead, they decided to go the route of acting like those movies didn't exist, like starting this new universe. And I like that movie for what it was. I think we both gave it pretty positive reviews. But at the end of the day, I think them retconning that is just a way for them to try to make the Ghostbusters franchise big and profitable again.
Oh yeah, 100%.
All right, cool. So we have to talk about the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer that was released Tuesday. It was the last thing I watched before I went into my surgery. So if I had died in surgery, I would have died happy, because the trailer's fucking awesome, man. It looks great.
Oh yeah. So it was pretty much everything that I wanted it to be. Like, it's so good. The Mysterio is so close, as far as his costume and everything, to the original comic book version. I'm curious to see what they do with his character. Like, is he going to have because I think originally he was like a studio, like, visual effects guy, and that's kind of how he got into being Mysterio. And I'm curious to see what kind of backstory they give him, because, I mean, of course, the MCU always kind of does whatever they want with the character's backstory, and I've come to terms with that. I'm definitely one of those people that I've learned to separate those two, between the comics and the movies are a completely different entities, and I can learn to appreciate both of them for what they are. But I'm very curious to see what kind of backstory they give that character, and just like, everything just looks so good. I love the Uncle Ben nod with the suitcase. I thought was really cool. Just the Happy and Aunt May stuff was cute. I thought that was really hilarious, and just like everything about this trailer was fantastic.
Yeah, man, it was great. I definitely agree. I think Mysterio is an amazing villain. I think that, I don't know if I included him on our top 5 Spider-Man villains when we did that episode when we first started the podcast, but as I've grown and reflected, he would definitely make that list now for me. I think that Jake Gyllenhaal is amazing casting, and that the trailer overall looks really fun and really funny, but still like a really great Spider-Man movie that's going to have some amazing action as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And again, I think it's so weird. Like, they usually kind of ground some of these villains, and I would say one of the most ridiculous villains, Mysterio, they go completely per the comic book as far as his costume's concerning. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And again, I'm very intrigued by what kind of backstory they give him.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about these Marvel movies is you have to start off, and you know, this universe started off when The Dark Knight was huge and everything was so grounded, and that's kind of how this universe started off. They wanted to make sure everything was grounded, but as they've gotten away from that and they've done movies like Guardians of the Galaxy or plot lines like Infinity War, where you're dealing with Infinity Stones and just crazy shit, then they've started to let loose and really put comic books up on the big screen, which is awesome, especially for a character like Mysterio.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I would definitely throw Doctor Strange in there as well.
Oh
It's
yeah, for sure.
The weirdest, most comic booky movie I think they've done so far.
100% agree. So last story I have, and I'll pretty much turn it over to you to kind of lead the conversation. Although I did watch the launch trailer, is that they did the launch for Mortal Kombat 11, which is coming out in April. We talked about the first trailer that came out a couple months ago, and it was more so just like a cut scene, whereas this looks like actual gameplay footage. But I know you're a huge Mortal Kombat guy. Obviously, you're the guy who does our YouTube page where you can see Pat game and do that kind of stuff. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the launch.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting, and I talked about this. I just recently did a top 5 most anticipated video games of 2019, and spoiler alert, if you haven't watched that video yet, this was number 1. MK11 was number 1 for me. I'm a huge fan of the franchise. I played the games. My buddies and I from high school used to have, when their new game would come out, we would have MK tournaments, and that was a lot of fun. And so I love these games, not just for nostalgia, but NetherRealm Studios has really, they have polished and honed how to do a fighting game, not just the mechanics of a fighting game and how all that works, but I mean, with the Injustice games, they really honed in how to do a story. And the Injustice games and the most recent MK games, those are probably the best stories of a Mortal Kombat game or a fighting game ever. Like, they used to do this weird thing where it was kind of like an open world thing where you were just like this random character and you would like go and like find certain things in this area, and then you would occasionally like run into like Scorpion and you would have to fight him and stuff. And that was really stupid and really boring, and they finally figured out that that's not what they should do with a story mode, and they finally kind of, like I said, honed into what a story mode for a fighting game should be with like the Injustice games and the most recent MK games. So I love these games. Kind of like with TMNT, you can always tell when I'm like super hyped about something because I talk about it for a really long time. But to get into the actual reveal, I think it's kind of awesome that we just found out about this game. I mean, they've kind of teased it here and there, but it's like video games are different than movies. A lot of times you find out about them at an E3 in 2014, and the game doesn't come out until 2018. Like, that's how video games, like, that's how long it takes them to get developed. And this game now is kind of going back with some of the mechanics of the older games, so it's probably not as difficult to make a game like this because they basically already have the foundation for this game already set in stone. But we just found out for sure that this game is happening, and we're already getting it like 6 months later, which I think is amazing. And I loved that they had this reveal, and it was almost like an E3, like a mini E3, which I thought was kind of cool. Now, I don't know necessarily that they had enough material to warrant the spectacle that was the MK reveal, but it was still pretty cool that they made a big deal out of it because I do love this game so much, or these games so much. I don't know about MK11 just yet, but I'll kind of get into some of the stuff that we saw. I love that the characters that they showed, because they only showed, I think, like 7 or 8 characters, but the characters that they showed, kind of like the Injustice games, like you can see the characters that are going to be immediately playable, and then you know that there's space for other characters. So I don't know if all those characters eventually you're going to unlock, or if they're going to be DLC or what. But basically the characters that you did see, I thought that there was a really cool mix of old, and then there was a couple of new characters, like Scarlet, who isn't technically a new character because she was, I think, a DLC for MK9. So they finally brought her back, which I was personally not a huge fan of her, but I know that she's a fan favorite. The person that I was really excited that they brought back was Baraka, who hasn't been in the game for a little bit, and he's always kind of been my favorite character, one of my favorite characters. And so he's just so badass, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then they did introduce a brand new character called Garrus, who basically looks like an Egyptian Jax. Like, he can kind of, like, manipulate sand, and so I'm kind of interested to see what type of moves that he'll be able to do, because I think that's kind of an interesting thing, and I think that they can be kind of creative with that concept. So I'm interested in that. I was never a huge Jax fan, though, so hopefully he doesn't play like Jax, because then I just won't fight with him, because I just don't generally like his moveset. And then they also brought the customization from Injustice 2 into Mortal Kombat, which I think is really cool. Like, they showed that you can change Scorpion's spear and other stuff about the costume. And so I'm pretty excited about that, because it gives you a collector's mentality for these games. Like, I know I collected a lot of loot from Injustice 2, and that was a lot of fun. Like, especially when the TMNT became DLC characters, I went through and kind of changed what they look like, and it was really cool. So I'm glad that they brought that into MK. The big reveal that they spent a lot of time with that I didn't give a fuck about was that they finally officially announced that Ronda Rousey did the voice for Sonya Blade. Not only do I not care about Ronda Rousey, I hate Sonya Blade as a character. I never thought she was very interesting. She has never been a character that her moveset really interests me at all. And so it's like they took two things I didn't give a shit about and combined them. But I will say that I did get a kick out of, because I was watching this on Mortal Kombat's Facebook page. They did a Facebook Live, excuse me. And some of the comments were that they should make Sonya Blade, like, if you knock her out twice, she's no longer playable in the game. And so like, people were piggybacking off of that and be like, oh, well, if you beat her twice, then she's just going to move to the new wrestling game or something like that. So I thought that those were kind of funny. I should have wrote down who actually said those, because give them credit, but they were pretty funny. And then the last thing that they announced at the very end of the reveal that I thought was interesting to bring up is the collector's edition, which, I mean, they have a premium edition that comes with all of the DLC and all that good stuff, but then they have a collector's edition, which comes with like a steel book, and that comes with a bust of Scorpion and other stuff, and I'm sure that it comes with all the stuff that the premium edition also comes with. But I was expecting, like, so the Spider-Man collector's edition, which I bought, which I'm glad that I did, because it's awesome, was $160 after everything, after tax and shipping and all that stuff. GameStop wants $300 for this collector's edition. They are smoking crack that anyone's going to pay $300 for this. Because I think the Spider-Man statue is really cool with the Sinister Six and everything. I think it's really cool, and it's not cheap. So if they could sell that for $160, that bust, even though it is really cool, I don't see how they think they're going to essentially double the price of the Spider-Man collector's edition with this MK collector's edition, and people are going to buy it.
Somebody's going to buy it.
Oh, I mean, I know that the people are going to buy it. I'm not going to buy it. Like, I thought $160 for the Spider-Man was a little much. I'm glad that I did it, but if it was any, like, I literally said, if this was any more expensive than the Spider-Man one, I'm not going to get it. But I was going to get it if it was going to be like 150, 160 with all that other junk tacked on. I was definitely going to get this. $300, you got to be fucking crazy.
I guess it just depends on what the bust is like. You know, I'm a huge fan of Sideshow Collectibles and Hot Toys and like the products that they put out. That being said, I don't buy those products because they're crazy expensive and I can't afford to sink that, $500 on a premium format statue or figure or something. But if it's of that quality, I would get the price tag. I just think it's a strange decision to make because you're very much limiting your consumer base on who you can sell that to.
Oh, yeah. And to make matters worse, it's only sold at GameStop. And as a consumer, I try to avoid buying anything from GameStop just because I think they're a terrible company and they treat their employees terribly. And now that I'm a grown-up and I have a lot of disposable income, I can kind of make those choices. And, yeah, I kind of refuse to buy anything from GameStop. But I did buy a Nika TMNT statue that's going to come out in February. I did get that. Donatello's my boy, so I had to get that, and it was really cool. I pre-ordered a statue. I've never done that before.
Yeah, be careful, man. It's a slippery slope. I have a lot of statues that I've gotten from pre-orders, but it does make sense, though. I didn't realize it was exclusively at GameStop. It means that this is pretty much just a Hail Mary for them to keep their company in business. Like, if we get enough people to give us $300, then we can last another year. Oh,
I don't think that this was on your radar. Maybe it was, and you just decided not to bring it up in Nerd News, but I guess I'm bringing it up right now. Like, GameStop is getting sold. Like, it's happening within this year. Like, I mean, they're pretty much dead.
Who's buying them?
I don't remember. It's not anything like, it's just like those investment companies that no one's ever heard of. Like, there's two of them that are vying for GameStop right now. So, it just, I mean, GameStop it's not even almost a game store. If you've ever been in there recently, it's much more of like pop and collectibles and stuff like that. Like half of the store, and most of the stores are like fucking closets to begin with. So it's like they've tried to lean into like collectibles and comic books and stuff like that more than games because they're so terrible at selling games.
Yeah, it's kind of sad in a way because, stores like that were a big part of high school for me and like going there and being strapped 100%. For cash and turning in games and finding cheap games and discovering new things that way. But it kind of makes sense that it's coming to an end. Like that you can download stuff straight to your console now and games, really good games are more affordable, especially indie games. So I guess it's just time for it to go away.
100%, and they're a terrible company, so good riddance.
All right, man. That's all I have for Nerd News.
All right, so we are going to get back to reviewing movies this episode. We kind of took a little bit of a break and kind of did our special 2019 episodes the last few weeks, and those were a lot of fun. But we are back to reviewing things for our main topic, and this episode we are going to review Glass, which of course was written and directed by M. Shyamalan. And that joke is so stupid. I apologize for making it. But anyways, I had to. Mostly because I don't actually think I know how to pronounce his name correctly, so I just make a joke out of it. Anyways, if you're not aware, Glass is about David Dunn, who we first see in Unbreakable. This is the third movie in the Unbreakable franchise, if you want to say that. He tracks down Kevin Wendell Crumb, who is played by, I almost call him James Franco every goddamn time, and I don't know why, James McAvoy, who is a disturbed man whose multiple personalities gave him superhuman abilities. So I don't know about you, Tyler, but I recently rewatched Unbreakable. I mean, I think it was probably a year ago, so I guess that's not super recent. And then I watched Split for the first time, like the next night. And I was pleasantly surprised at how much Unbreakable holds up. Like, I am not a huge M. Night fan anymore. Like, I used to be obsessed with his movies, but I'm not a huge fan anymore. A lot of his movies don't hold the same place in my heart as they used to. The Sixth Sense is still really good. And again, Unbreakable still really holds up. But I thought that because of my nostalgia for this movie, that there's no way that it could possibly hold up, and surprisingly it does. And then Split is just a boring fucking mess. Like, I did not like that movie at all. And I'm going to say this a couple of times during my review, but I honestly think that if Split wasn't connected to Unbreakable, nobody would have gave a fuck about that movie. And really, honestly, if you haven't seen Split, it's literally the last minute of this movie. So if you're watching Split for the first time, the Unbreakable connection is literally the last minute of this movie. And then it's over, and then it kind of feeds into Glass, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But, like, I think that, well, I mean, it's not all that Split was built up for me, and I had my expectations kind of high, but Split was just a boring mess for me, and so I went into Glass with very, very low expectations.
Yeah, I remember you avoiding Split like the plague for a while because I think M. Night Shyamalan had become one of your I'm not going to do it anymore. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean or Transformers. So that being said, I knew that you probably weren't going to like it because you've soured so much on it. I did like Split for what it was, but I do think that a lot of that had to do with when a filmmaker pumps out so much shit for a decade, when they make something halfway decent, everybody rejoices, especially somebody like M. Night Shyamalan that for some reason keeps getting opportunity after opportunity to make movies. So I think that's kind of my opinion there. Like, Split was fine. I liked Split a lot more than you did, but it wasn't a masterpiece. Like, it was a 3 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5 maybe for me. And I haven't even revisited it since I saw it in theaters. So that being said, I did want to revisit Unbreakable like you did, and I didn't, which was disappointing. I wish I would have rewatched that going into this movie, but it is what it is. I would say between Unbreakable, Sixth Sense, and Signs, those are the movies that I like from M. Night Shyamalan, and that's about it. I guess you could throw Split in there too, depending on the day. So that being said, I didn't have a ton of expectations for Glass. I thought that it was cool that he was bringing these two movies together and kind of going for a continuity thing, but I didn't rush out to see this. Like, I saw it at my leisure, wasn't super excited.
Cool, man. So we break down our reviews very similar to how we break down the episode as a whole. We do it in segments. Now that we've kind of gotten our intro and our expectations out of the way for Glass, let's do our first segment, which is basically a general overview. We call it Broad Strokes. So how'd you feel about Glass?
So I kind of feel weird reviewing this movie, similar to the way I felt about talking about the comic I talked about this episode, which was Black Widow, and for the same reason, which is because I walked away from Glass feeling very indifferent to the whole experience. I think I went into it knowing that M. Night Shyamalan does not stick the landing often, so I didn't have a ton of hopes that he would in this movie. But with that being said, I didn't necessarily hate the movie either. It just kind of exists for me. So will I watch it again? I mean, maybe at some point, but would I care if I never saw it again? Absolutely not. It's just kind of there, and I could care less one way or the other. So it's going to be a weird review for me.
So you just said that you were indifferent. I was definitely not indifferent. I fucking hated this movie. It was, according to IMDb, it is 2 hours and 9 minutes long. And I think that there was maybe 25 minutes of interesting stuff that happens in this movie. I honestly really, really had a hard time keeping my eyes open. It was a good chunk of this movie was like their little therapy sessions, and I did not give a fuck about that. This movie, unfortunately for me, because I do care about Unbreakable, I do think that that's a really interesting movie, and like I said in our intro, it does hold up. This movie was much more Split than it was Unbreakable, and I just couldn't care less.
Fair enough.
All right, so let's move right into the story. How'd you feel about Glass?
So let's get this out of the way. This Glass definitely has some cracks in it. So
Heyo!
Yeah, that's right. So I'd say that the biggest flaw for me with this movie was that it was so anticlimactic. You build up this universe, and you end with the surprise and Split that is connected to Unbreakable, and then you just, with those two movies, you set the stage for this epic crossover, which ends up being the three of these characters locked up in a mental institution for most of the movie, kind of like what you were saying, which is boring and not exciting and not climactic at all. So I don't think that it's necessarily a terrible story that's told in this movie, and I actually did like some of the plot points and ideas that were presented, but the problem is that it was such a slow burn when this was supposed to be the Avengers Infinity War of these three movies. So you can't do a slow burn in a movie that's a culmination of 19 years. It just doesn't feel right. You built it up, and then you treat it like a puzzle, when in reality, this is supposed to be the result of these other puzzle pieces coming together at the end of Split. And that's why I think this movie isn't resonating much for me, or from what it looks like, other people that went to see it. With that being said, I don't think that a bad story is necessarily told here. I mean, it's disappointing for sure, but the idea of all of this being a possible delusion isn't far-fetched. So I think it was interesting to see Sarah Paulson's character get into the heads of these three characters. And when everything comes together in the end, it kind of makes sense. But it's just not the story that I wanted. It's the story that we got, and it was okay. But again, it was pretty much a 2 hour and 9 minute letdown.
So you mentioned that he continuously, like M. Night continues to disappoint people. I mean, he built his name on these twists, and he hasn't really been able to deliver for like the past decade. And I said this with The Visit. Why do they keep giving him money? Like, the thing that bothered me the most about going into Split was I kept hearing that, like, oh, this is the return to form. I was like, well, I heard the same thing with The Visit, and that movie fucking was awful. That was such a bad movie. And so I feel like since he built his name on these twists, like he almost kind of has gotten into his own head that he has to have twists in these movies. And with Split, I thought he got kind of lazy. Like he was just like, oh, I'm going to have this movie, and then at the very end, I'm just going to connect it to one of my older movies that everybody loves. And it just kind of got lazy. Well, in this movie, it was like he almost got too cute, because there's like 3 twists in this movie. And again, I thought this movie was really fucking boring, so I didn't give a shit about any of them. And it almost kind of felt like he wanted to do more. I'm not going to spoil what happens at the very end, but it kind of felt like he was building something. I was like, God damn it, don't make me go see another one of these fucking movies. Like, it kind of felt like he was trying to build another thing off of this movie. So maybe 19 years from now, we're going to be reviewing the next movie. But yeah, it just, oh my God, I can't stand the way that he tells stories, because like I said, I think that he feels like he has to have a twist. And in this movie, there was like 3 of them, and I didn't really give a shit about any of them. I kind of just sat there and was like, okay, here it is. Like, I'm waiting for it. Give me the twist. And then there were 3 like subpar twists in this movie. And again, if they make another one of these movies, I'm probably never going to watch it. But I will say that I'd love to see a David Dunn trilogy. I think that Unbreakable by far is the best movie in this trilogy, and I thought the little bit of him kind of stalking people at the very beginning was kind of interesting. Like, I would see that movie with him and his son just like doing this home security store during the day and kind of stalking bad people at night. Like, I think that would be kind of a cool movie. Unfortunately, we got just a little bit of that. I will say that I'm not a fan of the way he treats YouTubers. That wasn't a huge fan of that, but those guys did need to get their asses kicked, because those types of YouTubers, which I don't know if you know this, Tyler, you can't do that shit on YouTube anymore. They will ban you.
I heard.
Yeah, that was a big thing. And one good thing that came out of Bird Box was that you can't do that shit anymore. So, yeah, that was the one good thing about that movie. But it's just not what he's interested in telling. Like, he's not interested in giving me a David Dunn knows he's a superhero the whole time type of movie, because we didn't get that in Unbreakable. We only got like maybe 20, 30 minutes of that at the end of Unbreakable. So I think that that's the most interesting part of this trilogy, but that's not the most interesting thing to him, and that disappoints me. I will say that I thought Elijah was a cool character in Unbreakable, and he's certainly smart in that film, but I think that they kind of turned it up to 11 in Glass, and I thought that was kind of ridiculous. Like, I get the idea that these other two characters are super strong, and he really can't compete, obviously, because of his brittle bone disease, so they have to give him something, but they went way too far in this movie. Like, some of the twists and turns with his character were pretty fucking stupid, and I rolled my eyes a lot. But, yeah, obviously, I made it pretty clear in my broad strokes that I did not like this movie. Honestly, I tried to think of stuff that I liked about it, and other than the David Dunn stuff at the beginning, I really didn't care for this movie.
Perfect. You ready for performances?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, performance-wise, I mean, I don't have a ton to say, honestly. I don't think that there were any bad performances except for one that I'm going to get to in a second. But for the most part, you have some pretty talented actors here. I think Sarah Paulson has really come into her own after the last few years, especially coming off of the OJ show. So she's great in this. I think that she's a very talented actress. Samuel L. Jackson is pretty much great in everything he does. Bruce Willis is a piece of shit in real life. But he's fine here. He doesn't honestly do that much in this movie. Actually, thinking back, I think that you could probably fit all of the dialogue that Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson have onto like 3 pages. Like, their characters don't talk a ton, but their performances are fine. The person I want to talk a little bit more about is James McAvoy, obviously, because he does most of the heavy lifting here. I was pretty complimentary of him in Split, and for the most part, I'm going to be pretty complimentary here. I think that it does take a good actor to portray all of these individuals that are these personalities that live within this character, and the way that he switches from one to the other, I think, is really good. There is one, though, that was supposed to be menacing that was laugh out loud ridiculous, which is whenever he's the Beast. So that's the character that you don't really see in Split. Like, it's leading up to the Beast coming out. And in this movie, you see the Beast a little bit more, and the Beast has lines, and it is not good. I don't know if it's a James McAvoy choice or an M. Night Shyamalan choice, but for this character that's supposed to be extremely menacing and powerful and all of that kind of stuff, it just doesn't come across that way. Like, I laughed at when he was talking as the Beast. So all of the stuff that he does as the other characters were great, especially like with Patricia, or whenever he's playing the 9-year-old boy. I think his name is Dennis, or Hedwig.
Hedwig, yeah.
Hedwig. I think all of that is great, and the way that he switches from one to the other is great. But again, the Beast, woof, it was not good.
So I actually thought, when you said, because you kind of teased that there was one particular person that didn't do a great job, and of course, I mean, I agree with you, the Beast is ridiculous. I think the choice of giving him lines is pretty fucking stupid. So yeah, that didn't go well. I thought James McAvoy did an amazing job in Split. Like, the way that you can just tell, just with the subtle changes in his just body language. It's hard to create separate characters when you're the same person, but I think that he does a really phenomenal job at that in Split, and he does a good job in Glass. Again, the Beast having lines is probably M. Night's fault, not his fault. So I think that he did a pretty good job. The person that I thought you were teasing, that I thought did a really bad job, was Spencer Treat Clark. Is his middle name Treat? That's according to IMDb. His middle name is Treat. I didn't even realize that. I thought it was Trent, but then it literally says Treat on there. Anyways, he's Joseph Dunn, the kid in Unbreakable. They got the same actor who was just obviously grown up because it's been 19 years. I thought that was kind of cool that they got the same actor to do it, but he is not good in this movie. He was really, really bad. I thought that he was really good in Unbreakable as a kid, but yeah, he was not good in this movie. So there was one scene with him and Sarah Paulson where he's supposed to be like, I get that he's supposed to be like nervous but it's kind of played off as more comic, and it's not good. Like, he definitely cannot step up his game with Sarah Paulson, who does a lot of good work in this movie. But I agree with almost everything else that you said. I think that everybody else did a really good job. Bruce Willis, again, piece of shit. Like, we can't say that enough. But he does kind of this subtle thing in this movie. Like, again, not asked to do too much, but I thought he did a pretty good job.
Perfect. So I guess the last thing we would want to talk about then is the action in this movie, which there's not a ton, but there is a climax to talk about at least. So, this action was definitely on a budget. I think they've made a big deal that this movie was relatively cheap. It cost $20 million to make, and it's going to make all of that back and then some this weekend alone. But again, you could tell that this was action on a budget. I appreciate that the climax of this movie wasn't all some get out superhero fight that used a lot of CGI and this and that, but I was honestly expecting a bit more than what we got. Like, even the fight choreography was really, really bulky and not great. So, this is one of the few movies where I'm going to say the action was a pretty huge letdown for me.
Oh yeah, 100%. There wasn't much action in this movie. There was a lot of bear hugging between Bruce Willis and James McAvoy. Like, that was disappointing. Like, we have been waiting for this showdown. Like, we didn't know we were going to get this when Split came out, obviously. But, like, now that we know going into Glass that we were going to finally get David Dunn versus the Beast, it was just so disappointing. And there was a moment in this movie, and it kind of harkens back to what you said about it being fairly cheap. It's like James McAvoy picks up a table and throws it at Bruce Willis, and the CGI of that is really, really fucking bad. Like, you would think that James McAvoy obviously had to get in really good shape to do this movie. You would think he would be able to pick up a table on his own and throw it on his own. Just get a smaller table, man. Like, if you can't do that scene practically, don't do it with that shitty CGI, because immediately it took me out of the movie, and it just showed how cheap it was. And then again, immediately after that scene, they just hugged it out, which was very disappointing.
Yeah.
And then one of the cooler scenes from the movie is when, like, James McAvoy is, like, charging at Bruce Willis, David Dunn, and you see that fucking moment in the trailer. So I was like, okay, I'm just waiting for that to happen. And so that was disappointing. And then when you finally get them to square off at the very end, like, it's just, okay, they pushed each other into a van a couple of times, and then that's it. Like, that's essentially all that happens. Like, they bear hugged it out at the beginning, and then they pushed each other a couple of times. And that was pretty much it. That was all the action that we had in this movie.
Yeah, no, well said.
All right, so star rating. Out of 5 stars, what'd you give Glass?
I gave it a 2.5 out of 5.
Okay, so I have to be honest with my rating. So I, again, reviewed Second Act on Facebook Live, and I gave that movie a 2 stars. And I really wanted to give Glass 2 stars as well, but I was like, nah, I can't give Second Act 2 stars and then give Glass the same amount, because Glass was a much easier movie to watch than Second Act. So I'm going to give it 2.5 stars, but it's a very soft 2.5 stars. And honestly, I know this is probably not going to make much sense, but as far as, like, our worst of 2019, that eventual conversation that we will have either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year with Matt Hurt from The Obsessive Viewer, like, we always do a least favorite at the end of that episode, and this is the movie that, if I had to pick right now, would be my least favorite of 2019, which seems odd because I gave Second Act a worse rating, but I didn't expect that movie to be good. And not that I necessarily really expected Glass to be good, because I didn't really like Split. I was at least curious to see what Glass was. I didn't give a fuck about Second Act. So I will pretty much immediately forget that I even saw Second Act. I will not forget that I saw this movie.
Yeah, so this is the only movie I've seen so far that was technically released in 2019. So it is both my favorite and worst movie of 2019 right now. So
yeah, technically it is my favorite movie of 2019, because I think technically Second Act came out in 2018. But yeah, it's just, man, it was bad.
Yeah.
I did not enjoy this. So, nerd favorite, what is it this week?
So we talked about Mortal Kombat in Nerd News, and I'm just curious. I've never played Mortal Kombat with you. I know we reviewed the Injustice game, and we've talked fighting games before, but I'm curious what your go-to Mortal Kombat character is, because I legitimately don't know, and I personally haven't played Mortal Kombat in a while. I think the last Mortal Kombat game I played was probably the Mortal Kombat DC Universe crossover, and then I played a couple of standalone Mortal Kombat games before that, but I'm not as big of a fighting game guy as you are. So I'll probably play Mortal Kombat 11, but I just want to preface it with my answer is not as backed up as your answer is going to be. Like, I was never part of tournaments with my friends or anything like that. So mine just goes back to more so the character I liked a lot in childhood, which was Raiden. So I remember playing him on like a Super Nintendo, and then I played him on the PlayStation 2 game, and for whatever reason, I think it was a combination of his sweet ass hat and his whiteout eyes and the lightning moves that he has, that it just all kind of resonated with a young Tyler. So that was always my go-to character, and chances are that will be the first character I play on Mortal Kombat 11, just for nostalgia's sake. I also remember liking that character in the Mortal Kombat movies, even though I don't remember those movies very well, and I'm sure they suck. I liked him as a kid, so it was always Raiden for me.
Yeah, so I have several different answers, and I'll try to be quick. Like Liu Kang, sorry. You started talking about Raiden's hat, and I immediately got Kung Lao stuck in my head because he has a pretty fucking cool hat, and it actually matters with his moveset. Like, if you can get good using the hat, he's a pretty badass character. But Liu Kang was the first character I used that I actually beat Mortal Kombat 2 on. I think I had it with Super Nintendo, and I remember this was pre-internet too. I just remember dicking around with Liu Kang and remembering or figuring out how to do his bicycle kick, and I literally beat that game basically just doing the bicycle kick over and over again, which is very similar to how I beat, I think it was Street Fighter 2. There's a boxer character, and he literally there's a move where he'll grab you and just headbutt you. And that I literally beat that entire game with using that boxer character by just grabbing people and headbutting them the entire time. So that's kind of just gives you an insight of how I played the game as a kid. So like, I was really proud of myself when I figured out how to do that bicycle kick. Because like I said, it was pre-internet, so I couldn't just look it up. I had to figure it out. And so that was kind of the first character that I really fell in love with, just because, again, I figured out how to do his move, and it was a cool move. And I was able to essentially beat the game with it. But the character that I like the most, like as far as like design of the character, is Baraka, which I talked about a little bit earlier. But his moveset is not always the best. He's kind of a slow, lumbering character, and that's generally not the character that I do the best with. The character that I do the best with, that's going to ultimately be my long-winded answer, is probably one of the most generic answers, which is Scorpion. And I say that because other than Raiden and maybe Sub-Zero, like, that's the go-to character. I think that would be most people's answer if they were asked this question. But my answer, it's Scorpion, because at least for most of the games, he's played the way that I want to play in these games. So I play a lot of fighting games. For those that watch me play Injustice 2 on the YouTube channel, you know that I love fighting games, but you also know that I'm not the best. I'm not bad at them, but I like to do the same thing essentially over and over again. To a certain extent, like, I have just a general way that I like to play these games, and I like to do a lot of like short, easy combinations. I usually like to do some super moves that will kind of lead me into those combinations. Like, my favorite character in Justice 2 was Gorilla Grodd, because he had a long reach and he had some really cool combos, and he had some special moves that would kind of stun, and then I could do my combination that I wanted to do. And I got pretty good at like stringing those combos together. And Scorpion, at least in some of the games, plays very similar to that. Like, he has the teleportation where he comes up behind you, and then you can do a combination. You can do the spear that come over here, and then of course that stuns the character, and it kind of allows me enough time to kind of get into the combination, or you could do the little flame where he brings a flame below wherever the character is standing, and of course that stuns them. So it's kind of, he plays the way that I want to play, and there's several different ways that I can do what I want to do with Scorpion.
Yeah, I mean, I think Scorpion is a very popular answer. I just remembered another reason before we close out the show that I liked Raiden so much, and I don't know if you had this toy as well, but when I was little, I had like a Knock'em Sock'em Robots, but it was Goro and Raiden. And I think it was...
Oh, man, I would have loved that.
Yeah.
No, I had the Rock'em Sock'em Robots, but it was just a generic red and blue.
Yeah, so I guess it was probably... It came out right around the time as the first movie, and I'm pretty sure it was just movie merchandise, but I fucking loved that toy. And I can't believe I forgot about it for so long, but that was... Raiden was obviously one of the characters on there, so I think that was another character, or another reason that I enjoyed Raiden so much. But, man, Mortal Kombat was so fucking badass in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was super ahead of its time. And I'm literally looking it up right now, and I cannot find one on eBay, so that is very disappointing to me. All I see is the regular, like, red and blue Rock'em Sock'em Robots. I expected it to be expensive, but I'm not even seeing it on eBay, so I think you might be a liar.
No,
That's the only reasonable explanation.
So Google Goro Knock'em Sock'em, and I found it. And I found like a couple eBay listings that have expired, and it looks like it goes for about $40. So not too crazy.
Shit, I'm buying that like immediately.
It's good stuff, man.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So that is it for episode 224 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. As always, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're on it. I don't know if we're on Spotify yet. That was something that's, I think they just started recently, so I definitely need to get on that. So if you listen to Spotify a lot, we will be on there shortly. I just have to get my lazy ass to actually do it. But you can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com, including our YouTube channel, which I appreciate if you comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can either find it by clicking on our YouTube tab on our website, thenerdspodcast.com, or just by searching The Nerd You're Looking For on YouTube. And then you can, of course, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Google+, and you can also email us at thenerdyourlookingfor@gmail.com. And finally, if it's still a thing, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are the Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.